Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us all today. We're having this wonderful convention conversations. It's episode 15. The topic of today's episode is equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I'm going to introduce myself. I am Trevor. Christian is my last name. My pronouns are he, him. I am the moderator for this event. I am previously based in New York, now kind of based in Boston. Normally we would do, all moderators would do a land acknowledgement. I'm personally an Indigenous person, so I do not do land acknowledgements because I feel that as my presence in the space, bringing what I bring to the table in terms of ancestry and history, that I am enough in terms of just reminding you all that you are indeed on Indigenous land. Instead, I would like to give just 15 seconds of silence in regards to Ma'Khia Bryant. I think that, yes, we have seen a guilty verdict this week with the police brutality case. Unfortunately, this is an ongoing crisis that we must all address. So I would like to give just 15 seconds of silence here to reserve that space for her. All right, thank you all so much. So we're going to go ahead and do some introductions. I'm just going to pop it off to Carla Martinez, and then you can do popcorn to whomever you want.
Hey everyone, my name is Carla Martinez. My pronouns are she, hers. I'm an Eastern Principal Delegate here in New York. I am currently on the Munsee Lenape land, and I am going to pass it over to Tavon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tavon Gamble. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm an Eastern Chorus delegate, and I am in Matunic, Rhode Island, the land of the Narragansett. And I'm going to pass it on to Ryan.
Oh gosh, I'm going to pass it on to Adriana because I need to text this number to get my land acknowledgement.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Adriana Gaviria. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am right now in New York, the land of the Lenape, and I'm going to pass it on to Michael. Oh, I'm a principal Eastern delegate. Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael James Bell. My pronouns are he, him. Pronouns are he, him. I'm a Western Principal Delegate, and I live in Santa Monica, which is in the Los Angeles Basin, which is the land of the Tongva. And I'll pass it to Kaylin.
I'm Kaylin Sakima. I'm the Eastern Chorus Delegate, he, him. Full disclosure, I am not fully educated on the land acknowledgements, but I am in New York, and which I believe is the Lenape people that I've just learned. So I commit to learning about it because I'm not educated, and I want to be fully transparent about that.
Am I left? I'm left.
And Ryan.
Yes.
Yeah. Ryan Morales, he, him, pronouns Eastern Principal Delegate. I'm also in New York, the land of the Lenape people.
Thank you, Ryan. So we just have a member read the mission statement and code of conduct. Can I get Michael to do that?
Yes, I think so. Here we go.
Thank you.
The Transparency Coalition is a group of Actors Equity Association delegates. Am I reading the right thing?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't see you and read at the same time. Dedicated to leadership and communication that is truly representative of our union's members. We're bringing the discussion of convention resolutions and amendments directly to members through a series of live discussions, allowing members to ask questions and express their support or concerns in real time. We are committed to creating an environment that is rooted in respect so that we can productively create and sustain this inclusive, respectful, brave, safe space to discuss complicated issues. We will always extend that respect to members watching, and we seek the same in return. What we ask is that both the members engaging in conversation with us and the delegates themselves hold these two agreements. 1, speak from the I. 2, confront confusion or discomfort with curious questions. While we are happy to engage in constructive debate, we view harassment and discrimination as a clear threat to free expression and participants' safety, and as such, they will not be tolerated. We ask that the members who engage with us give us the grace to say, "I don't know," or to get it wrong sometimes. We bring you this series of convention conversations not only to have meaningful dialogue with current and future members, but to learn more ourselves about the important policies of our union and to enhance our ability to serve as trusted liaisons for our fellow union members.
Thank you, Michael. All right, so I have been told that my internet's a little choppy, so if you can't hear me, I apologize. But we do want to just encourage everyone to ask any questions and share comments in the chat. We will respond to these live when we see them, and we definitely want to hear you, get you engaged, and a little more active in this conversation. I also want to do a quick shout out to Davon Williams of the Black Theater Matters bill. I don't believe that we'll be discussing it too much here this evening, but please check out the receipts, www.thereceiptswithd.com. Obviously, we're all very familiar with that. If you're not, we will drop that link below as well. And then also shout out to Wumi Fuwara and her Black Equity in Hair and Makeup resolution. She actually has been hosting Q&A sessions on this, including just one yesterday. So please reach out to her if you would like to know more. So we are going to just jump right into one of the discussions of these resolutions, which I am actually thrilled that we've got Kaylin here with us, who was the maker of this, the Equity Inclusionary Promise. So a little bit of background, I'll just read. The ADA law is not consistently followed in all arenas of the job, and we need our union to enforce the federal law in these matters. The resolution seeks to hold the employer to the federal ADA law, which includes all aspects of the job from auditions, rehearsal to performance. If a theater has a historically protected landmark designation, it is on them to figure out how to comply with the federal law and for our union to hold them to that. All right, perfect. So Kaylin, I would love if you, as the maker of this resolution, I would love if you just talked a little bit more about this, discuss it more in depth so we can kind of learn a bit more.
Yeah, so I think it's important to just know that I've always been around the disability community ever since I was a child with a family that is part of this community. Recently, later in life, one of my best friends that is also a performer is also part of this community. So I've always stand with her. And recently, because of an injury, I did lose some mobility in my foot. It's not limiting to the point where I would be officially considered legally disabled. However, I did lose a lot of mobility and am unable to do certain things the same. So I feel a little bit of connected here, and it made me want to step up to make sure that equity was accurately, that they were accurately holding, I want to hold them to their promise. They always say diversity, inclusion, blah, blah, blah. But it usually is around race. It's really doesn't include ability. And I wanted to address that. And so this addresses that. I found a hole in our union, and the federal law states that a labor union can require these to be implicated. And it's nowhere in our contracts. It's nowhere in the agreements, and it's not being actively upheld. So that's where that came from.
So just to clarify, because I'm not particularly super familiar with any sort of coverage of any disabilities within it, but I just want to make sure and clarify that the current status of coverage within any sort of disability community is minimal, correct? I guess I'm wondering just how much is covered in terms of addressing disabilities in the workplace, especially.
So to my understanding, what's happening is that the ADA is federal law. However, the Department of Labor actually doesn't enforce it. So it is up to the employers to create it and abide by it, or it is up to the people of the community to file claims. For labor unions, it's their responsibility to uphold this law. So the law is asking for equal opportunity. So when it comes to auditions or interviews, what that means is the space should be accessible to every person, regardless on what their ability is. And I think that is just a fair, equal opportunity, period. When it gets into the workplace, it can get complicated and getting gray very, very quickly, because the ADA did grandfather in historically landmarked venues and buildings. So there are certain structures that don't have to abide by the ADA. And so what I'm suggesting is there are workplaces that fit within this gray area, that they present a possibility to equity to accommodate somebody of the community. It's not saying they have to. It's saying, can you please proactively think of how would you accommodate this person? In hopes that later down the line, it will already be practice of, hey, I'm working in XYZ theater. Can I use your accessibility option? Great. Maybe after a couple of times, a producer may want to enact on it because the work is already there. What's happening is that the producers don't want to do the work, or they're just not thinking about it. And so I'm trying to make it a one step easier of, hey, maybe if we make it common practice to just create a possibility in the workplace, one, it's just easier to do later on. And two, it gives them a reason to be like, yeah, let's invite everybody in and let's see what happens. But for the audition and interview, it's point blank. It should be required because that's what makes it an equal opportunity.
I do have a question kind of regarding the physical disability. I'm wondering, what's your approach in terms of any sort of disability that may not necessarily be visible to the eye? Is this an inclusion as well? And how would you address exactly going forth with a disability that may not necessarily be physically recognizable?
So this resolution is, think of it as step A or step one. It is to get it in the union, get it in the language, and so that it can start being implemented. What you bring up might be a step 2 or 3, but what I'm suggesting is once it's in the language, then we can figure out, okay, does this need to be disclosed on the audition notices? To be fair, do they need to contact them in advance if there's certain requests? Things like that do get to be figured out. And that is something that needs to be worked on. But this particular resolution is the start to crack that work open. The reason why I concentrated just on this to start with is it's easier to digest than try to create, hey, this is law, let's fix it. And maybe we can do this. It's like, let's just focus on one thing and then we'll move forward again.
I love that. I also wanted to know, because I completely agree with you in terms of diversity, inclusion, equity, et cetera, is very race-based. It's very you putting into categories in terms of including, and I use the term diversity also kind of in a generic sort of way, because I do feel like oftentimes diversity in the workplace is kind of a white supremacist solution to a white supremacist problem. And so I'm wondering, I guess, how are we going to be able, I guess, how are other people that may not necessarily be of the disabled community, how can we actively right now in this moment continue to lift and elevate and be much more inclusive with the disabled community? Because that's a feeling that I'm completely on board with you, and I would love to hear your thoughts in terms of holding hands and running forward together within this solution.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact lady, and I have a little grudge with Disney personally, but this executive from Disney was on a inclusionary panel, and she blew my mind. And ever since then, I was like, I wish that I could have recorded it to explain it. And I'm going to just kind of try to sum it up what she said. Diversity is having the differences present. Inclusion is celebrating and including the differences. So there's a difference between having diversity and actually including them. And I think that clicked in my head, because when I think of inclusion, I don't think I have to have this, I have to have that. I think, oh my gosh, it's an invitation. It's including, it's an invitation, which means there's engagement. It's not just you're here to fill XYZ. And I think that was very important for me to understand how I could make that more of a action rather than filling the paper. If that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
I mean, yeah, it does. I mean, it answers it in a way. I'm wondering, I mean, that is like extremely helpful just moving forward in general as well. But I'm wondering also, are there things actively right now that as an able-bodied person I can do to constantly include and uplift the disabled community with me going forward?
I think you bring up a good point, because how I acknowledged that I wasn't educated about the Indigenous land acknowledgement. You taught me something that I get to learn. Just like how you're asking me, how can I get involved? I think it all starts with dialogue and communication, but also understanding, because I may be ignorant about something or may not have been privileged with that information, that doesn't mean automatically it should be looked down towards. It should be like, okay, how can I support you? How can I include you to get everyone on the same page, if that is even possible? But I would like, for equity members, I think the best way is to ask genuine questions. And if you know somebody in the community, ask if they are open and willing first. Don't just bluntly ask them. Ask for permission first, because everyone may not be able or willing to speak about it. Start with that. There's also Disability Pride every year. Obviously, not right now, but I believe there were 3 or 4 in New York already, and Equity did participate in them. To be honest, I was pissed that Equity participated the way they did in the 2nd or 3rd year, because they reused pride things, pride flags, pride shirts. They just reused it, and that personally offended me and my friends, because it was like, we're participating just to participate, but we're not going to put the same effort as in like gay pride. So that's one place where equity members can participate, because it's there. And there's also members of the disabled community within council. So I feel like it's being active and wanting to learn as well as listening. But yeah, does that? I feel like I'm the only one talking.
Well, yeah, I was actually just going to say, I'm like, at first I'm having this really amazing, like, one-on-one conversation with Kaylin, and everyone's like, yeah, listen to him speak. So I was just going to ask, because I feel like Kaylin has been on the hot seat for a bit. So I would love if somebody could talk about Pat Loeb's comment here. I believe it's highlighted, auditions are required to be ADA compliant, but often are not. I believe Carlo, can you just talk about this a little bit more in depth?
Sure. So with my own experience, a lot of my professional career was in New England. Like, I've been in New England for the past 10 or 11 years. And I noticed, I actually asked this question in the, we have like a delegate group, like a messaging group, like when we got elected. I was so curious because in New England, we have a lot of really old buildings that don't have ramp access and they don't have elevators. And I've always wondered, like, wow, well, this sucks. Like, how does somebody ask for this kind of assistance for aid without also kind of sabotaging themselves? Because there's this fear, like, if you ask for assistance, then you're already seen as problematic. And I also asked in this chat group, like, well, what about like large print scripts? We have a lot of members who are visually impaired, and not necessarily like visually impaired that they're legally blind or blind, but they do need they need to either have their phones. There's like an app that helps them see the scripts if there isn't a large print available. And so I said, like, is this something that should be on the producer, or is this something that should be on AEA? Because in my mind, the labor union that's supposed to help us facilitate this is often not there. So in my experience working in New England, I rarely saw that. I rarely saw somebody coming into a space, specifically like a wheelchair, because it just didn't, there was no way for that to happen. And that also kind of goes into rehearsal spaces too. Tavon and I work at a theater in New England that the rehearsal space is on like the very top floor. So like the elevator only goes up to like a specific floor, but then you got to take like 2 flights of stairs to get up to the rehearsal space. And it's like, how, and there were older people like in this company, and watching them struggle, I was like, there is no way that somebody who, has difficulty walking can get up this multiple times a day. So yes, it is, their auditions are required to be ADA compliant, but often are not. In my experience, like, I have seen that, all over the place, not specifically New England, but because I spent a lot of time there and because the buildings are older and there is no ramp, like I did see that a lot. And someone else can, like, in a different area can speak on what your experiences are. Michael, I'd be curious to hear how things are in the West.
I don't know that I can speak to that very well. Pat maybe can.
Sorry, guys, it took me a minute to get on. Too many Zooms today, and my eyes just refused to focus, so I needed a minute to not be here. This is a community that I am deeply involved in. I have a disability, and I have been fighting this battle. I mean, I've had disabled friends since I was a kid. There are currently quite a few stage managers who have invisible disabilities. I don't know if you guys know that. I was very active in the I Am PWD campaign, which was at the time a tri-union campaign to try to solve some of these problems. What Carl is talking about is common practice, which is, how does a wheelchair get up a flight of stairs for an interview when there's no elevator in the building? And this is a real problem, according to the brilliant leaders in the disability community, like Anita Hollander and Christine Bruno, where they're talking about the challenges of historic buildings and how they're not allowed to adjust them. The compromises that were made on the Tonys for Ali Stroker. And it wasn't, they didn't make the compromise. They did what they were allowed to do in terms of a time frame and in terms of the construction of the theater. It wasn't a deliberate snub. They made arrangements. It just wasn't the best possible arrangement. And yeah, things could be done better, but this is new. I battled for years to be able to get interpreters at, tri-union meetings because I worked extensively with Deaf West, and I was trying to get people to get involved in these discussions. And they're like, who's going to pay for the interpreter? The accessibility of scripts in Braille, which is actually becoming more, that one's actually starting to solve. But there's also a stigma attached, which is, I've worked with several actors who are legally blind who don't want anyone to know because they won't get cast. People are afraid of disability as though it's somehow a catching disease, and it's not. And you would probably be surprised to know that you have disabled friends who haven't told you about it. As they say, disability is one of those arenas where you're going to, God willing, the creek don't rise. You will someday be a senior and you will someday be disabled. Those two things are going to happen to you if you live long enough. So why does it take a pandemic for the things that the disability community has been asking for years to become common practice? And look how much talent and how much brilliance there is among so many of those performers and stage managers and designers and directors, so why are we letting ourselves lose out on that? It is a challenge. It is a challenge because there is, whenever people talk about diversity, I always add, they say BIPOC, I always say, and PWD. I always add that to the conversation. And some people have said, oh yeah, well, of course PWD, we just take that for granted. It's like, no, you don't. If you don't actually say we're including persons with disabilities in this conversation, you're not going to include persons with disabilities in this conversation. We're lucky in the West. We have Deaf West. We have, there's a company in Seattle, which is a sign language company in Seattle. There are, for a short time, there was a wonderful little theater company called Blue Zone Theater. And Blue Zone, because that's the color of the handicapped curb, right? It's the blue zone. And there were people with mobility issues, and there were people with little people, dwarfism. There was a whole collection of people, but it was really hard to get funding. Yes, I don't know. There is, in every contract, there is a clause that says, when deaf people are being interviewed, you have to provide an interpreter. When blind people are being interviewed, you have to provide a Braille script. It's not that the language isn't there. It's that it's not enforced and it's not supported by the producers and the union. We've had a battle for years about language, about how to discuss disability that is language appropriate. Are you talking you don't talk about differently abled anymore. What words you use, what words you don't use. Well, it's the same thing as the way language is evolving in every other aspect of diversity right now. So you have to be willing to what do you want me to call you? You want me to call you a wheelchair actor? Do you want me to call you, a visually impaired actor? Do you want me to call you deaf or hard of hearing? tell me how the language you want me to use, and I will use it. And that's really important, respecting how people want to refer to and identify themselves. And I've talked too much, but sorry.
No, you're so fine. Actually, Rayshawn has left a comment here. It says, does our current contract language like Off-Broadway or LORT take care of what you're trying to do? Or is there something farther? So basically, to answer that question, Pat, it says that the language is there, but the execution is not? Is that
exactly?
Okay.
Exactly. It's exactly what Carla was talking about. I have wheelchair friends who show up for auditions and have no way to get up the stairs to them. I have friends who are blind who, they don't let out the scripts early enough, so they don't have access to Braille scripts until they are, if there is access, and the producer doesn't know where to go to get them, even though there are plenty of resources available to producers to find out where to get a translated script into Braille, to find out where to access sign language interpreters, to find out how to make sure that where they're asking someone with a mobility issue, a mobility disability to audition is freaking accessible. What Carla's talking about is common practice.
And I do want to mention that I like Pat, how you're saying producer, because sometimes the blame falls on, well, isn't that casting's job? Well, as a producer, you're hiring everybody and you can set the standard. So you have the power to make sure that things are enforced.
The ability, and it's part of it is the responsibility of the actor to inform people, because I've talked to friends who they show up at an audition and their agent didn't know that it was up 2 flights of stairs. The producer needs to inform the agent, the producer needs to inform the union, where that is. And if there is no accommodation because of a historic building, then they need to find a way to create accommodation for those actors.
Okay, so I actually love this question. So he sent a follow-up one that says, so if this is an enforcement issue, what is the next step to fix this? I don't see language that is fixing that problem. So that's kind of where I was thinking as well, is if the language exists already, what's the execution problem? What can we do? Who is going to be there to enforce the issues at hand?
And that's actually the challenge, is the enforcement, how to make sure that people in this situation are able to report it appropriately, and how the people so appropriate steps can be taken so solutions can be found. This is a problem which is ongoing, which gets talked about, but without that aspect of how do we solve it. At one point I went on behalf to a TCG, or I was invited to a TCG conference where they're talking about disability. And the whole point was, I'm coming in as a stage manager to tell you how easy it is to work with people with disabilities. And I had directors who were saying, well, but if they're disabled, then they're not going to be as talented as this actor or that actor. I'm making a compromise by hiring a disabled actor. And you're like, no, you're not. It's so easy to work with these incredibly talented people. And I'm so grateful now that we're starting to see examples of that with the film Coda, with Sound of Metal, with quite a few people who are working as, in New York, for example. There's a whole lot of people of all varieties and shapes and sizes working on all those millions of CSIs, but that's a question that has yet to be, it gets discussed a lot, but solutions get suggested without any action being taken. So I think one of the things Kaylin's resolution offers is an opportunity to sit down at a table and go, okay, we understand that so far proposals for solutions have been either ignored or simply not acted on. For whatever reason, people don't know how to act on them. So let's sit down and figure out how to act on these. Let's sit down and figure this out so that this incredible, Allie can show up to an audition, so that Christine Bruno or Anita Hollander or any number of other people, I'm thinking New York right now because so many of you in New York, how those people can show up to an audition and actually show people how talented they are. Michelle Banks, brilliant, brilliant Black actor, deaf actor, who I worked with in Los Angeles before she moved to New York. The fact that that woman is not on Broadway right now is we're missing. It's us that are not being. It's us that are hurting, because she's so freaking brilliant that if you've never seen her work, you are missing something. And the fact that she's not out there every day being sought after because she is this brilliant actor who happens to be deaf. You know, how do we solve this in a way that producers stop being afraid of it?
And I think one thing that Pat mentioned that I think many individuals forget is they get to figure things out in their own way. So they're natural problem solvers. They're naturally creative. For every little thing, they have to figure it out. And so imagine having that type of creativity in your developmental process. Like, what? You can do this? Let's do this. I can't just imagine. Well, I can't imagine it, but just think of when you work as an ensemble, people are bouncing ideas off of each other all the time in development. So imagine if you had different mentalities, different people thinking, what kind of work could be developed? It's endless.
Kaylin, I just wanted to ask one more question, and then we can move on to this next resolution as well. But I wanted to know, as this first resolution's author, I'm wondering, who do you personally think, or what is a way that you personally think that we can find that accountability of action where these things can be applied, and if an actor or a musician or a person that has a disability that needs certain things and to access to just simply exist and accomplish the things that able-bodied people are, who do you think needs to be held accountable for those?
I feel that the producers need to be held accountable as the quote unquote owners of the production or moving it forward. I mean, I say owners as in they are licensing the rights. They are technically leading the projects. But I think specifically for the audition and interviews, I feel it's a breakdown in equity auditions. There isn't enough consistent development in the audition interview spaces. And this is just one area that is just falling through the cracks, along with safety. And I think this is just one part of a bigger problem. I don't know if that answers your question, but
I think it answers in my mind, it answers the question. I think it's a very difficult sort of pipeline of and a rungs on ladders to sort of just figure out exactly how do we accomplish these goals together to hold those accountable, that in order for everyone in the community to be equally served, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan, do you want to go ahead? I know that there's one thing that you would like to address, and I would love to hear from you as well. It's this comment from Aldolfo.
Yeah, I think this is such a great question. He's asking about if we're going to be addressing body positivity in terms of equality, diversity, and inclusion tonight, which I think is a fantastic question and absolutely something that should be addressed. And he says in this that it's something that's very undervoiced. I think it's pretty clear we could talk for another hour about just the one topic we're on. And right now, because we're talking about 3 specific resolutions for the convention, is no resolution that, at least from my knowledge in the convention, that addresses this. It sounds like, and why I wanted to call this out is that another convention in a year. You've got, can't count, 7 people on this call who are delegates who are going to be at the next convention who can take this mantle, or there are other delegates who can take this mantle. And I think it's really great that we're getting to have this conversation and getting to hear, like, wow, we didn't address that at all this convention. It isn't being addressed. Topics are already set, but how can we do better? like how can we address this in the future? And so I just want to signal boost what Adolfo's saying and say, unfortunately, we're not going to talk about it today because it's not any of the resolutions we have on the docket for the. Thank you so much for speaking up, because hope is that this can encourage a delegate or a group of delegates to look into this for the next convention.
Yeah, I also, to Adolfo's comment, for those watching, if you haven't seen what Stephanie Lexis is doing with the Broadway Body Positivity kind of program, their Instagram handle is Broadway Bopo. Stephanie is incredible, and her whole platform is body positivity and casting, you know, within the industry. And I would definitely direct people in that direction because what she's doing is incredible.
Pat, did you want to, first of all, Pat, can you actually introduce yourself just because you joined a little late? I want to make sure that everybody watching knows exactly who you are.
Oh, so sorry.
No,
Pat Loeb, Western Stage Manager Delegate on the unceded land of the Chumash and Tongva tribes in Los Angeles. What else do you want?
Can I give you pronouns? And then I want you to talk about also bringing that to Bliss that you had mentioned.
Oh, Bliss Griffin is our diversity, our DEI person at Equity, consultant, and she's wonderful. And I've had the opportunity to have some really great conversations with her about issues that people are afraid to bring up for a variety of reasons. And she's so good. And so she is our official equity person. And it's something that, you know, to put in her hopper as one of the issues that we can challenge with panels or with educational opportunities through what she brings to the union, the opportunity she can bring to the union.
Perfect. Well, if it's all right with everybody, I think I'm going to go ahead and move on to the second resolution. So this resolution is called, it's Work-Life Balance Support Act, Education, Training, and Protecting Members from Pregnancy and Sex Gender Discrimination. So we again have the maker, Adriana Gaviria, here. And I'm going to give you a background and what the resolution will be addressing, and then I'll have Adriana talk about it. Background would be the caregiving and pregnancy are not issues that our employers want or know how to deal with. They will simply not hire or comply with the law some of the time, and that is being generous. This resolution seeks to educate our staff so they can be the advocates we need and enforce the federal laws around the issue. This resolution also seeks to have language negotiated into each contract that will protect and advocate for the members so they can't be fired, and also so that producers see there is a way to hire those who are pregnant or are caregivers so that our members are not continued to be discriminated against in this situation. So Adriana, I'd love to hear more from you about this resolution.
Sure. Thank you so much. I actually keep on thinking about the comments that are being posted on our platforms, especially what Adolfo said, because these are all issues that maybe at one time we may have experienced ourselves, or we know our colleagues have. And so how is it that you bring those issues to the union? And this is the first time that we're doing this convention. So for me, it was a huge learning curve on how to bring something that I'm really passionate about and that I've been really advocating for. How do I bring this issue to the convention, right? Within this formula that we have to work with. And one of the things that one of our viewers mentioned is, for example, like auditions, right? How to bring to light an issue that has been, I forgot the term that was used, but that has not been highlighted. And I kind of had to learn on my way through, and there was a question about auditions, right? Who controls the auditions, right? Are the producers in control? Do we have the ability to put something right in our agreements to make that change. And there was a section in my resolution. I know we're not reading the resolutions word for word, and we're speaking generally, but there were a couple of things that I had included in my resolution that have been moved because have we talked about an omnibus at all?
Only vaguely.
Vaguely, yeah. So there was something that was created in order to move these things toward a better path forward that we could prioritize when we're negotiating in our contracts. And so that those sections were moved. So those were some of the things that Trevor mentioned. And when Adolfo mentions that, and all the other viewers that are mentioning those things, what I learned was that we do, right? We when we go into negotiation, we can insert certain provisions when we are working with our employers. So that is something that can be included. And that's something that I didn't know and that I feel it was valuable for you that are watching to know that is something that we can put. And so all these issues that we're talking about, we can definitely bring that to light. And the other part of it is the education. You don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know what people are experiencing. And sometimes you think that you're the only one that is experiencing things. And then you start talking with other people and you realize that other people are experiencing the same things. So for me to talk about this resolution it means a lot to me. It's taken me a really long time to get to this point. I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would even run for a delegate. I didn't even know that this was happening. Someone had asked my friend to run and she didn't have the capacity and the time. And so she just suggested it to me. And that's kind of how it happened. And so I've learned so much, and this resolution I'm really, really passionate about. When I first started in this career, I always wanted a family. I always wanted to know how was I going to balance that work life, right? And I remember I was a student and I had the opportunity to shadow a stage manager. I was in Miami, and I believe the stage manager, I think it was a musical. It was a musical that was in town, and I was able to shadow the stage manager. And I was like, "How do you do it? How do you balance both?" And I remember it was just something that was always present in me, and it was a belief, right, that you couldn't have both. I am trying to discourage that way of thinking, but that is what I was coming into. That's what the belief was, right? And it was always it's like what Pat said. It's not that the language is not there. It's just that you don't have the support. And when you don't have the support, you feel that it is impossible. I try to, and then to your comment, if the language is in the contracts, then how do you move forward? And so I actually did. I peeked into our contracts. And one of the things that I noticed is that pregnancy isn't even mentioned when you're describing. There's a couple of sections in various contracts that we have where it alludes to defining, right, discrimination and inclusion and diversity, and pregnancy is not even mentioned. It's really important for artists to be informed of what our rights are and to be up to date with what those rights are, because the language is constantly evolving. Laws are constantly evolving. And each state is very different. Each state also handles things very different. I went into a deep dive onto like meals and breaks for each state. And each state also has different rights. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about lactation. You see lactation wellness rooms, break time for breastfeeding. But it's not only about that. It's also for infertility injections. It's for medication. It's for wellness, just your overall well-being. And these are issues that just have not been considered. It just boggles my mind why these have not been considered. I'm very passionate about this because of something that personally happened to me. And it's really hard for me to talk about. So I keep it private, but I did write about it in a HowlRound article. If anyone is interested in viewing, maybe we can post it up later. But at a point in time in my life, when I contacted the union for a question that I had, the union let me down. And the answer that I got was, I don't know, and that you'll probably get fired, and regarding pregnancy. And I had never felt more alone and ashamed and lost. And I had never asked the union for anything else. And that one time that I reached out for information or for guidance, and the union let me down. And because of that experience, because I don't want any other person ever to go through what I did, to be given wrong information and to make decisions based on wrong information, just put the fire in me. And I never want anyone to experience that again. So it's really important for me that members, actors, artists, staff are educated and know that these are federal rights that exist and that should be highlighted for our members so that they know. So that's why I felt that education was on a very, very basic level, such an important aspect of this resolution. And then how do we move forward? How do we enforce things that already exist? Start changing the language. Start changing the language in our contracts. Start changing the language in our code of conduct. Start changing the language in our social media campaigns, including pregnancy and related medical conditions, including all of these terms that should be included, because the more we see them, the more we recognize them, and they're not hidden, and no one can feel alone and ashamed or unsure or think that they can't have a family and a work-life balance. Like that's just ridiculous. And also caregiving for me is also another passion of mine, because caregiving doesn't only include children. Not everyone chooses to have children, and not everyone chooses to family build the same. There are many ways to build a family, and caregiving also includes taking care of your relatives, of your older parents. You'll get to a point where you will be a caregiver at some point in your life. And it's a very, very hard and often rewarding time, because you get to spend time with your family, your friends, whoever it is. That it's a very tough time, but you cherish that time as well when they're no longer here. But yeah, caregiving involves not only children, but caregiving of your family members and members and others with disabilities. It's just encompassing. For me, the work-life balance is a very passionate issue, and I wanted to find a way in order for this convention to change the inner workings of how the union works, right? And to make our lives better. And this was the way that I was able to find a way in.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, I just want to thank you for bringing so much passion to the table. I mean, I think it's incredible to see, both Kaylin and Adriana speaking about their resolutions. I'm so excited, and I want to read all of these things completely thoroughly, because I love seeing the passionate leadership that we have here. Adrian, I am wondering, a question that arose for me was just in general, how do you feel that this resolution will transform the way that pregnant women and also members that are caregivers in the union are treated as a whole? What do you see in terms of the transformative process of how it looks like now or pre-pandemic, and how it will look like moving forward?
Yeah. So first of all, pregnancy is not a women's only issue. That's something that I also want to highlight, right? It involves everybody. It involves anyone that it involves pregnant people, and it involves everyone in some capacity. And I think that for a really long time, if anyone chose to go the path, right, of pregnancy or starting a family, it was the end of your career. I've heard so many stories from people all over the country, because I've done a couple of conventions and conversations around the country, and a lot of them very intimate conversations, private conversations, and hearing people's stories. And a lot of the terms that I would hear often is feeling alone, feeling ashamed. There's this secrecy, there's this secrecy of hiding that you're pregnant, hiding that you have this desire for motherhood, to start a family, to be a parent, or to have caregiving responsibilities, that you have to hide it, that you have to be this perfect person that is not dealing with these outside life normal issues. So how is this going to change? It really, I find it that it helps when I hear other people talk about it. I find that it helps when my union, someone that, an entity, right, that I belong to, an organization, right, that I'm a member, I'm a member of this association that I'm proud of, right, because we're all proud to be equity members. If I see that the union, right, even publicly acknowledges, like, and celebrates this, it makes me feel like, okay, so I feel supported. And I did not feel supported before. There are many there, that's why we have so many delegates working on so many things, because these are all issues that for some reason or other, we haven't felt supported. And it's an exciting time that this convention can actually work on all these things. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it definitely does. I also am wondering, and I would love to open this up a little bit more, just to the table as a whole. But the title of this resolution is Education, Training, and Protecting Members from Pregnancy and Sex/Gender Discrimination. I am wondering if this resolution as a whole it addresses any sort of trans or non-binary folks discrimination, or is this more focused on the pregnancy and caregivers element of this?
No, it absolutely, I mean, that's intentional, and it absolutely does, because there are many forms. When I was researching and writing this resolution, yes, we are talking there is that pregnancy issue to it, and the discrimination and the harassment that goes with assumptions that employers make, right, based on those things, which should not be happening and should not be. They should. Okay. people should not base their hiring decisions, right, on these protected classes. But yes, it's very intentional that I wrote it that way, and it does involve discrimination and harassment for that as well.
Great. I do want to hear, I know that with Michael, I'll focus with him a lot in the next resolution, but I do want to hear from Tavon. I just want to hear a little bit more about your thoughts in general, because I mean, I haven't really talked to you a whole lot, and I definitely know that you've got some good things to say. So I definitely would love to hear your thoughts as a whole on the more sex and gender discrimination element of this resolution. What are your thoughts, and what are things that you feel are important to that you definitely have addressed in this resolution at the convention as well?
Well, the first thing that, and I'm going to already just steal Kaylin what you said, because it goes with what I think as well, is he wrote time to humanize the union. And I think what it is, it's seeing our members as people first and not as the product, you know, that we are people, and like the actor is a part of me. It's what I do, but there's the other facets of me as a human being, and I have my life as well. I spent a lot of time. I spent some time, wonderful time with you talking about this before, Adriana, and I love this resolution because it personally affects so many people that I know who are trying to have that work-life balance and trying to make it work. Especially up here in New England, Boston, where it's all about trying to have a work-life balance because of our situation of you know, with the NEAT contract. Let's just, like Carla knows, you having a family, and theater is not going to always do it always for you. And what I find between this and our previous resolution, it's trying to get rid of that stigma. Because what I have experienced and I've seen is that sometimes what happens is that people put them in very dangerous situations to continue to work. And we have got to educate not only our members, but we also have to support our members to be able to have that freedom and space to speak up so that they're not putting themselves in harm's way to continue to work because they're afraid that they won't work anymore, that they'll be blacklisted, or that there'll be a stigma with them going along in their career. That's the big thing that I have seen, is people putting their own themselves in harm's way because they don't feel that support. And I think it also takes it takes not just, I think, and I've opened up my eyes of having to. So much, I think, in this business, we think about ourselves, and it's not, and we need to continue, and we need to think about the bigger picture and other people more so, and looking out for other people, and speaking up, which I think is needed.
Yeah, I love that. Like, to kind of jump off of what both of them said, you know, it's about just like changing like the culture, like getting rid of the stigma. Similarly to, you know, COVID made us realize you can't just you can't show up to work feeling sick. Like after COVID, you can't muscle through a show and hope for the best, because it's only going to be a trickle down effect where more people are getting sick. And like, so like when I think about this, you know, I was an audition monitor. This was years ago. And a colleague of mine, she came in, gave me her headshot and resume. She said, guess what? And I was like, what? She's like, I'm pregnant. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. She's like, please don't tell the producers. Please don't tell casting. And it became this thing where I was like, oh my gosh, like, I'm excited for you, but I feel horrible that you just had to tell me that because you're so afraid of not getting cast in a show because you're pregnant, you know? And it's like things we also don't think about. How many times have we been on a show where, you know, people have got to organize, you know, pickups for their kids school's called, they're sick. And it's like, I'm not on a 5 right now, but I've got to take this call. And it's like, these are the things that this bill would help to, you know, it would help to alleviate. Just like it's crazy to me that people feel so tense about taking like a 5-second phone call because we're not on a 5, because their kid is sick, or because, you know, the parent pickup line is clogged, and like so yes, I'm 100% for this, because we need more support, and in ways where we can have the work-life balance, where it doesn't feel like you need to pick one or the other. Or in the case, you know, like some of these tours, like you see these bigger names bringing their entire families out on the tour, but that can only happen if you're getting paid to bring your entire family out on a tour, you know? So yeah, those are my thoughts on this.
Well, and I just think that and I say this all the time. I just think it makes the work better. Like if I feel supported by the community and my members, I'm going to be able to do my job better. We're all going to have a better experience, I think. It also, it's like to deny a part of your life to people just seems like ridiculous. You know, I've had some great experiences where I have worked at theaters that are open, where, you know, full on kids are running around, and it just makes the entire environment lively and awake. And I feel like those are the experiences I've done the best work, versus a like vacuum contained room where it feels stuffy and everyone feels like they're on pins and needles. Those are the rooms I feel like I do the worst work, and I feel tense and stressed, and the pressure is on. It feels like what we're not doing to get what we want our rooms to be. We're not actually doing the work or opening it up to make that actually happen.
Yeah, Pat, I'd love to hear from you too.
I first of all, I want to preface this by saying I love this resolution. I'm completely in support. The concept of being able, you know, caretakers for parents, single parents who have to deal with children's and pregnancy and all that. You know, speaking as a stage manager, I've been privy to the kinds of conversations where I understand where some of the concerns are coming from. And I wonder if you have thought about addressing, you know, in this incredibly litigious society, the concerns that the producers I've talked to have about the legal aspect of someone who's pregnant and something happens, or their child is running around backstage, which, you know, I love my cast members' kids. We're all, you know, extended family, and it's wonderful. But what happens if one of them trips and falls, and suddenly the producer or the venue is legally on the line for some kind of liability? And that is what I hope you guys have thought about in terms of addressing those concerns, because I would really love to see this resolution come into fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another reason too why I feel it's possible is because I've seen so much advancement in the corporate world. And when I don't, and I see what the difference is. But as far as liability, let's say, of course, safety and liability are issues that need to be looked into very seriously. But the way our contracts are written, or the experiences that artists or actors or stage managers have experienced, is that they're forced on leave earlier than they should be, or earlier than they themselves want to. So they're being forced to leave. That's not right. You know, I mean, obviously, there comes a time, just like in any other job, where it is, you know, if you are pregnant and you're due, there is going to be that moment when, okay, it's time for you. You know, there are ways to work with each other in order to make it possible. No one is saying, or no one is saying that we're not recognizing that these are issues that need to be looked at more closely. But but we're not even there. We're not even there yet. So this is a step forward in that direction to begin those conversations, and to, instead of thinking that it's just not possible, to at least start that conversation and thinking in better ways.
Yeah, Ryan.
And I think it's a theme that's, we just got all the resolutions today, and I've been thumbing through them. And I think it's a really common theme, what Adriana is talking about, of what number of resolutions there are that do not completely solve a problem, because we haven't really been equipped to know how to completely solve the problem, or the problem has been ignored for long enough, like Kaylin was talking about with his resolution. The problem has been so ignored or so under-focused that our job right now is really just to try to get our foot in the door for even solving the problem sometimes. And so, not that I think this is what you're saying, Pat, at all, but I think keep it in mind that right now we should, I think at least, we should be embracing that as much as we can do is still not enough. I think I can't wait to see us do way more to support people with disabilities. I can't wait to see us do way more to support people with caretakers. And I think all the people that are doing the work, like Adriana was saying, understand that this is a drop in the bucket of what needs to change. And I guess this is my hope, and I think everyone in the room would probably agree with this. But my hope is that we're not saying, well, this isn't doing enough. Why isn't it doing enough? Instead, acknowledging that we've done, a lot of people have spent, Adriana, you've been working on this, what, 6 months? Like almost since we became delegates. And like, this is as far as we were able to get in the time we got. And this starts the conversation and it starts the ball rolling. And I hope, that we as delegates continue rolling the ball down the hill instead of stopping the ball, asking it a bunch of questions and asking it why the ball isn't the exact right shade of blue. You know what I mean? And I worry that nickel and diming of our policy will be like the kiss of death moving forward. So anyway, that's me getting off my soapbox.
And I raise it just to make sure it's in the discussion, because knowing what the obstacles are very often the best way to confront and resolve them in constructive ways. To go, we know what the issue is, so now let's go solve the issue.
And member education is so important, because even just knowing, let's say you find out, we're going to go back to pregnancy because it's obviously, one of the things that I mentioned in my resolution. But let's say you find out that you're pregnant and you've just had such a job. Just knowing or being able to have resources for you, knowing what does that mean for you, and how do you have those conversations with your artistic director? How do you have those conversations with your costume designer? What does that mean? When is it that I'm going to start showing? How do this is something also that we don't talk a lot about, loss and grieving when you miscarriage, or when you're going through fertility treatments. You have to take that shot at a certain time, and if you don't, you've just spent thousands and thousands of dollars and you've screwed up like the entire process. How do we support our artists while they're on the job and they're going through these things? So it's like Ryan said, it's just starting that conversation and just putting it out there so that we can just bring, we could just start, because right now it's non-existent.
I think that is incredibly important. And I feel like I've definitely had friends in the industry that have been caregivers or have decided to leave the industry as a whole because they wanted to start a family. And I always question sort of that mindset of, well, why do you need to leave? Like, you can still do this. It's going to be maybe a little more complicated, but I would still encourage you to do it. It'd be such a sad loss to have you completely leave the industry because you are so gifted. So I really love the fact that this is being addressed as a whole, and family members can continue to just grow and learn from this resolution, and we can start to build upon this. So I do really appreciate the fact that you brought that to the forefront. I'm going to go ahead and transition to this last resolution that we've got that Michael James Bell here wrote with us. So this is addressing electoral reforms. So this resolution makes two simple but powerful improvements on our elections. Number one, a painless reform with huge benefits. Approval voting is easy to implement, easy to understand, encourages more diverse participation, and eliminates vote splitting. It always elects the candidate who truly has the most support. And two, adding a sequential proportional vote counting algorithm to our multi-winner elections helps give minority opinions a fair voice in the room where decisions are made. It creates a smarter governing body with more perspective. So Michael, if you don't mind, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about your thought process on electoral reforms here this evening.
Well, that sounds like a really great resolution. Yeah, thank you. There's this really exciting democracy reform movement going on in America right now, where people are waking up to, just the horrendous political problems that we have with all the sort of animosity and division and polarization, and people are starting to recognize that the way that we vote is not just a given. It's not just a thing. It's not just like an inevitable thing that we have to deal with and the problems are elsewhere. It is actually the source of so many of our problems, using this particular voting method called plurality voting, which is the voting method that we've all used in every election we've ever voted in, basically. So there's this sort of reform afoot to fix the system at its core, because and I suppose it's probably important to sort of explain sort of why this is part of a DEI conversation. I firmly believe that when you see injustice, it's very easy to sort of like blame somebody or blame some people and say it's because it's a result of these evil people. And the problem with that is that evil people aren't born; they are created by evil systems. And removing evil people or replacing evil people with other evil people doesn't solve the problem as much, as deeply, as truly as changing the system. And so I've always tried to focus on, finding what's the real core of the problem. And for me, what I've come to believe is that voting system reform is the way to solve all the problems that we can't solve because our government won't solve them. I mean, we use our government, and I'm talking nationally. I'm talking like, in America now. I'm not talking about equity in particular. Government is the way that we solve many problems. And if our government isn't willing to address all of these injustices, all of these problems, if they're not willing to address climate change, they're not willing to address racial injustice and money in politics, or all this, the problems won't get solved. And so having a system that gives the voters more influence over our elected representatives, as opposed to now at sort of a national level, I would say that our representatives are much more influenced by large multinational corporations than they are by what voters want. That's a function of the system. That's a function of the voting method that we use. So this came out of that. And the purpose of this resolution is simply to say that, and it's not a very complicated, these are not complicated. These are basically little tweaks to the way things work that have large benefits. I sort of lost my train of thought there. Go ahead.
Well, I'm wondering, because I'm looking at this first point that you made, talking about painless reform, huge benefits. With approval voting, it says that it's easy to implement. I'm wondering, because I'm not particularly familiar with approval voting, so I'm wondering, how do you implement the approval voting, and what does that bring to the table?
Okay, so this is just a short conversation, and but it is, I've sold it as simple, so I should be able to explain it. Approval voting is basically the system that we have now, where you have a list of candidates, and you have check boxes next to their names, and you check a box, and you add up all the checked boxes, and the person with the most votes wins. That's the system we use now. That is how approval voting works as well, except that currently, under our current system, if there are more than two candidates running, and I'm talking for like a single winner race, like for example, president of equity. If there are more than two candidates running, you can only support one. So if you actually support two, you don't get to say that. If you actually like more than one candidate, you don't get to say that. So what approval voting simply says is there's no limit to the number of candidates you can support. And what that means is voters are now looking at each candidate independently and basically giving them a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Yes, Ryan.
This is a maybe explain like I'm five question, but didn't we all essentially get voted in a altered form of approval voting because you could vote for up to a certain number, and the only difference is that there was just a limit? But a lot of, like, I know most of my friends probably didn't even vote for 15 people. They voted for the people they knew or they supported. So it's it sounds like it's something that's very similar to what we already use, and it seems to have a good effect for, this is kind of a leading question now, but it seems to have good effect for how we elect like a group of delegates from a region, and we could enhance that effect then for times where there's just like two president options or whatnot. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing in you're talking about a multi-winner election where you're electing a bunch of people to the same office at the same time. So that you're electing 5 people and there's 10 people running, you can vote for up to 5. The only difference with approval voting is you could vote for more than 5 if you wanted to. It simply takes off the limit. So it basically just makes it more flexible for you, just for the voter to say what they want to say. You don't have to vote for more people than 1. You don't have to vote for more people than 5. But you have that option if that's what you want to say. And the problem with the current system we have now, in it's most easy to see in a single winner election, like for president of the US, president of equity, is that given that the system really doesn't work if more than 2 people run, it has a tendency to discourage people from participating and from getting into the race. Like if I'm thinking about running in a race, I have to look at the race and see, well, who else is running? And if I get into that race, am I going to hurt this candidate that I like and end up taking votes away from them so that the other candidate that I really dislike ends up winning, and then everybody hates me? Probably I better just stay out and not bring my ideas to the table, because I don't want to mess with this system that only works when there's only 2 candidates. So that's one aspect of approval voting.
So we've got this great comment again that we can all see. I love ranked choice voting, approval voting. Has there been any research to know if there is a third-party vendor that actually does this for unions to keep us in line with the NLRB?
Right. So I don't think so. From my conversations going through legal review, we went back and forth a lot with me asking lots of questions. I don't think that anyone. There is language in this resolution, basically, that the lawyers wanted in and that I kept verbatim, which is basically says none of this, even if we pass this, it doesn't go into effect unless the Department of Labor says explicitly you can use this voting method. My understanding is they asked at one point in the past if there were any other voting methods that the Department of Labor had explicitly approved, and the Department of Labor said, no, we've never seen anyone try to do anything else, so we can't tell you. We can't explicitly approve anything. So whether or not this ever would get enacted, given labor law, given the Department of Labor, is a totally different question for me as far as I'm concerned. The first question is, do we want to do this? And if we pass it, then if it's legal, if it's possible, then we do it. And if it's not, it doesn't happen. Does that answer your question, Devon?
Yeah.
Sorry, Rashawn. Jesus.
I think it did. I'm personally wondering about, because I'm far more familiar with ranked choice voting rather than approval voting. How are they different, and what makes approval voting more effective here than ranked choice voting?
Ranked choice voting is much more complicated to implement, and it's not as good. It's the reform that most people know of. And it's a reform that has a lot of appeal because you feel like you're giving a lot of information, because you get to put the candidates in your order of preference. And with approval voting, you're just basically putting them into 2 boxes. Like, this is the people I support, these are the people I don't support. Ranked choice voting is harder to implement. It has some, I don't know. It has some. It's not part of this resolution. It is better than plurality voting, which is our current voting method. So it's not something that I'm very excited to see people adopting ranked choice voting across the country. I think it's great to try it out. It ends up often not being as good as people hope it will be. And the organization that I volunteer with, the Center for Election Science, has done a lot of research on sort of different voting methods, and we've basically come down to supporting approval voting because not only is it absolutely the easiest thing to implement, like you could implement it tomorrow with no cost. You just have to change the one rule in the code that says if someone voted too many people, you throw the ballot out. You just comment that code out and you're done. Like everything else is the same. So not only is it super easy to implement, it's also, according to the election scientists, one of the most expressive voting methods out there that really, really allows people to say, it's just a huge improvement over plurality. And I could talk forever about the difference between approval and RCV and why I like approval better, but this isn't the place for it.
Sure. I do have a kind of a general question for everybody in the room. This is sort of relevant to this resolution. It's sort of going on my own tangent, but I'm wondering, how do we actively get more members engaged in the voting process as a whole? I feel like there's so many members, and I feel like we don't actively participate in electing these delegates, at least not on a large scale level. So I'm wondering, what are y'all's thought process behind getting more people actively involved?
I have thoughts.
Go for it.
I think if it feels like it matters more, like that is the umbrella of everything, is if it feels like your voice matters and is heard, then you'll want to do the thing. And how we do that, I think there's a lot of different ways, and I don't think it's any single thing. But I think one way is more transparency in governance, so that members can see who they're voting for and see what their elected officials have been voting and how they've been voting, and get really excited about wanting to vote someone in who's really voted for what they believe in. And then that'll get them excited and engaged, maybe not voting for people that they feel like haven't had a track record of supporting what they believe. But I think regardless, it's not even about it being a punitive thing. I think actually just being able to see, like, wow, these people are doing what I want them to do, is a way for that to be exciting. And but I think it all does come down from the umbrella of, like, how do we make this feel more meaningful and like make it feel like something that matters and is exciting in some way, shape, or form? Because right now, it's, do you know this person's name or not? Like,
I think a lot of people don't feel like they have people that they voted for who win. And that's the sort of the second part of this resolution, which is to use an algorithm that sort of puts a value on having as much representation as possible, like having people who don't have a voice in the room get somebody that they voted for in there.
Adriana, did you have something to add to this?
Yeah, definitely what Ryan says, when you feel like your vote is going to make a difference, and also understanding the process. I had no idea how the union worked, or in the inner workings of the union. And also you get those emails and they're really hidden. And, we get a lot of emails, so it's very easy to not be engaged. And also what Pat mentioned, accessibility, all these meetings. I mean, who has time? I was never able to go to a meeting physically, because it's always during the day. It's just it wasn't accessible to me. And it was always whenever it would come up in a conversation, not necessarily about the union, but just in general, in a lot of industries, when you wanted to ask for something virtual, right, where you can access it from your home, it was always a hard no. It's too complicated. That doesn't work. It was always no. But then all of a sudden, just like that, everyone adjusted. So having these types of conversations, and really just talking about the union in general and just how things work, I feel like it really gets people engaged. The more information that you have, the more engaged you're going to be, because then you're like, oh, okay, I know what I can do. I know how I can contribute. Or if I don't have the capacity, but I have an important issue that I feel strongly about, then okay, maybe I can go to this person because now I know them through either these platforms, or just kind of like taking that screen, going behind the curtain and really getting to know your union and the people behind the union. And that's how you're going to get people more engaged.
Right. Go ahead, Caitlin.
There was one of the leaders spoke this week, and it resonated with me because he was focusing on relationships and creating value. And to me, that speaks to me because it humanizes and it makes you want to participate. It makes you feel heard, and it just, you want to participate. And I think for me, that might be one great direction to go towards is how do we build value? How do we build a better working relationship? Because that will lead to more engagement, I believe.
I think it's also it's the engagement involvement needs to happen not only pre-election but needs to continue post-election. I think a lot of our members feel that there's a lot of engagement when you want to get the vote, and then I don't see you again until the next election. And a lot of that is access also. Being not in New York City previously, the pandemic, didn't have a lot of access to meetings or any of that because I don't live in New York City. I live in Rhode Island. But what we've seen is we can do it. We can invest in the technology, and we need to do better, but we can do that to get people engaged. And I think that this has been a moment where our members have seen that it's a possibility, and I think we need to go further with that because I do think it's one of the problem is I think we get engagement only when it's time to get elected, and then it's like a ghost town.
Right, and I think for me personally, it's being a relatively young member of the union. I've only been a part of it for I think less than 2 years now. I'm still actively learning things about how the union functions, about what we can do to it, what my job is in what my involvement is in the union. And I think a lot of people, especially coming from a lot of these collegiate programs, these graduate programs, and being thrust into the industry, I don't feel like we are informed enough I'm speaking for myself, and I know a few of my friends feel this way as well, but I don't feel like we're informed enough about what the union does and what it offers for us and the protections that we are supposed to be granted when we become members of it. So that's kind of my thought process as far as younger people not getting involved in these elections as well. I do have one last question. Go ahead, Carl, please.
I was going to say what you said, Trevor. Basically, as an educator, I am 100% behind making it accessible, making the union and its language accessible to the younger generations. And sure, anytime I got this a lot, it's like, oh, well, it's on the portal. Well, what am I looking for on the portal? Well, the code of conduct is on a portal. The code of conduct is 8,000 pages long, and it's written it's this antiquated language that definitely wasn't written for people like me as a person of color, but also isn't written for anybody younger than the age of blank, so we need a way to, it almost makes me think of Sid Solomon did this really wonderful thing where it was AA in 30 seconds or something like that. And he would basically take something with the language that it was in and break it down for people to understand. And we need more of that and less of these emails that feel so black and white, cut and dry, business meeting, there you go. And equity in a minute. Yes, Rashawn, always looking out. Equity in a minute is what the people want and need. It's the content that I personally crave. We need it because it bridges a gap between, the old and the new. And I think that sweet spot in the middle is what's going to drive us in forward, if you will.
And I think it's also about representation, right? And that's what I like about what Michael has written, which I think is steering is trying to get, which to help with representation. I remember it's because I feel like if you don't see yourself also represented, then you don't want to engage. I know the deciding factor of wanting for me to run because I was like on the fence about it, and then I was like, well, let's see who's on council, let's see who's on this, and I was like, as far as who I could see from the portal of who identified as a black male, I was like, oh, there's Rashawn, there's Bear, oh, like that was it, and it was like it kind of shook me to see that was it, but that and to look at that as all of these people and be like, wow, that's all that's in the room, and to think about just those people having to hold all of that on their back, which is what got me to want to run. And I think for the first time, I think with this delegate election, people got excited, and to see more people get into the room. And I'm hoping that excitement and engagement goes even further than even this was, because I think it's about, do I see myself represented? And if I don't, that makes me want to just walk away and not be involved.
On top of that, I just wanted to ask Michael, with this second point of this electoral reforms, you mentioned adding a sequential proportional vote counting algorithm to our multi-winner elections helps give minority opinions a fair voice in the room where decisions are being made. I'm wondering exactly, how does that work?
It's a little complicated. But basically it happens on the back end. It happens when all the votes are being counted. It's when when we're electing a bunch of people to the same office. This is only for a multi-winner election, like for, Eastern principal delegate or whatever. You're electing a bunch of people all at once. Currently, you add up all the votes, you put everybody in order, and you take the top however many people, and you're done. This is an algorithm where instead of doing that, you do it in a more complicated way. You take the top one person, and then you take another person, and then you take another person. But in between each of those steps, you reweight the votes a little bit. So the people who don't yet have someone that they voted for in, their votes count a little more the next time. And what it ends up doing is, instead of having a situation, the current system that we have has a tendency to go towards everybody who gets elected has sort of a majority opinion, and minority opinions that aren't represented, that aren't held by the majority, tend to get almost no representation. And what the proportional algorithm tries to do is it tries to make the proportions match the electorate. So majority opinion still gets a majority of the seats, but it doesn't necessarily get all the seats. People who have, if you have a certain portion of the electorate that believes a certain thing and they vote for a particular group of people, some of those people get in too, sort of in proportion to how many there are out in the electorate. So it's just a more complicated way of counting the votes. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I really appreciate it. So, that is the last of the resolutions that we had planned to address today. I'm just wondering if anybody has any closing thoughts, any ideas. I really appreciate everybody coming out here and letting me ask some questions and get some more information from y'all. This has been incredibly informative to me, at least. I'm sure others as well. If anybody doesn't have any questions, go ahead, Ryan, please.
I just wanted to signal boost. Rashawn has been on the call commenting and stuff, and he's got a resolution called Racism and Safety that we didn't get a chance to talk about tonight, but I think it's super important, and I hope if anyone wants to learn about it, you can message one of us. I'll talk to you about it. But we didn't get a chance to talk about it tonight, but I really hope people will pay attention to that, because I think it intersects a lot of what we've been talking about tonight, and how all of this is a safety concern and it's a human concern. And so, and I know that there's a couple other resolutions that off the top of my head I can think of that deal with similar themes to what we've been talking about tonight. And I'm really excited as a delegate to get to vote for these things and start to change the culture in that way. So.
Yeah, Pat, go for it.
I was just going to say, this is really encouraging for me because, some people say they won't get involved until they see people that look like them. I'm one of those idiots who goes, I don't see anybody who looks like me, so I'm going to stick my foot in the door. When I was starting to get involved in equity as just as a committee member, and first of all, and yes, Rashawn's resolution is freaking brilliant. Delegates, please vote it up, as well as the others. I was sitting in committee rooms when the first female Western VP left the position because it was too hard for her as a woman. And she was men were being men and all the VPs were male, and she was being microaggressions and macroaggressions that were not recognized, and she just decided not to put up with it anymore. And yet here we are in a position where we're talking about things like women who get pregnant and caregivers and disability and gender fluid folks and stuff like that. And it's just remarkably encouraging for me to see that our union, which has a long way to go, is starting to actually represent what it's supposed to. The reason I originally got involved in the union was because I was so encouraged by the fact that, back in the day, equity members were the ones who stood up and, I'm sorry, I'm like barely speaking English, were the ones who stood up and said, no, we will not perform in a house divided where you won't let Black people come in and watch us, or you won't let people share, you won't let our actors who aren't white be in the same housing. You won't have this person or that person can't be on Broadway because they're not white Christians. And the fact that our union went into kind of a mud puddle for a while, and the fact that this is happening and we're starting to be the holders, the runners in the Olympic flames running ahead again, that's starting to happen again. And that's so encouraging for me, having watched this journey, because when you're fighting an uphill battle, it's easy to get discouraged. And this is re-encouraging so many of us who've been trying to break down these doors for so many years. And I just so appreciate every single delegate and what they've brought to the table and all these incredible resolutions. And while you're there, please support stage managers. But, these faces are so passionate and with your youthful spirits and all the hope, and it's giving me hope, and I thank you.
Kaylin, do you
Sorry. It's like, permission, please. No. I just want to echo what Pat was saying about don't feel discouraged. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary, and I'm still learning about the union. You can get involved, and you don't have to know everything. There are people there that are willing to answer questions and teach you, but it's a two-way street. And so you also get to be open to wanting to learn the information. So you don't have to know everything. Just be open and don't be discouraged, because it's a lot of information to take in. And so
I think that this is all. Oh, Adriana, go for it. I love all these closing sentiments.
I know, because being honest here, I have wanted to walk away so many times, and even Ryan has pulled me. He's like, no, you have, encourage me. Like, we've all encouraged it. So yes, yes, you are going to get discouraged. It's going to be hard. There's going to be moments, right, where there are going to be hard moments. You're like, why am I doing this? Why am I, you feel it's an uphill battle, right? And then you see this, and you get inspired again. And a lot of the work, like Pat said, like a lot of the work that we're doing now, it's going to be for future generations. Just like in anything, the work we do now, we won't see it until later on. And we just hope that we're moving forward. So it's okay if you get discouraged, just take your moment, feel it through, because I've been there too. But I've just been so inspired and excited by working with all the delegates, and I just want everyone that's watching to know that there has been so much work and passion put in all of this, and it's just been really, really great.
Mm-hmm. I think we also, given the past year that we've all had, we've done so much self-reflection and sort of discovery and musing over where we want our lives to be, where we want our world to be. And I think having these conversations and having these resolutions being put on the table and working together, I feel like we're very much kind of moving towards that world that Ryan wants to achieve, that Michael wants to achieve, that Pat wants to achieve, that we all actively want to achieve and live in together. So I really appreciate that. And again, I thank you all for letting me come in and moderate this tonight and ask some questions and get some more information out. I just wanted to remind everybody that these convention conversation episodes will be streamed live daily from now until April 24th, which is this Saturday. So feel free, please join us tomorrow, Friday, April 23rd. It is at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific time, for a second episode on stage management focused resolutions. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.